Hi Nishtha, good
I
to.
could,
I think this is something which we've been talking about since a long time now, which is mental health and how
yes.
you face a lot of stress and pressure during your PhD time. It is kind of need of the hour. So we've discussed a lot of
Mm,
therapies that are out there. I wanted to
right.
understand from you, like what are some of the common therapies which are available?
First of all, whenever we think or someone kind of points us to the fact that maybe there is a mental health issue that you're going through and you should take help, the first thing is to reject the idea because you don't want to accept that something is going on which you are not able to handle on your own. But I think the most easy thing that you can do at that time is to go to a psychotherapist or a psychologist and essentially you just speak to them. So basically you can chat to them like a friend and tell them your story and they will help you try to figure out, connect the dots and figure out for yourself where the problem lies or how you can tackle it. So they essentially clear out your thoughts. They take the clouds away. And so the picture is clearer to you. And that is most easily acceptable form of therapy and also most easily available. Though it might seem costly in depending on which city you are and what access you have.
Also, it takes like a lot of time to see any effects. And if somebody is going through mental health issues, then it's difficult for them to, give that much time to
Right.
working
Yes.
on their mental health with a
Yeah,
therapist.
that's very true. Apart from the time itself, sometimes they will give you activities to do which are going to help you. So, for example, in my case, the psychotherapist gave me something called CBT. So that's called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is essentially just trying to observe what in your environment triggers you and then working a way around it with your therapist. So the first step of doing that is to create a daily diary sort of a thing, which every therapist will probably give you a different structure of. But essentially, you record the main events of the day, how they made you feel, and what is your conclusion? Like, why are you feeling this way about this event? So, the problem that I faced a lot, and eventually I fell out of therapy after my first few sessions because of this, is because I could not maintain that diary. My biggest issue was following a routine or being disciplined. So not only was this mental health issue in my mind, it was also affecting my body. So my sleep cycles were not regular, my food intake was not regular. So therefore, there was no discipline or no routine of any kind, such that I will go to her without a weekly diary or, you know. So she had very little to work with. So eventually we stopped seeing each other, but of course on friendly terms. I understood the assignment that what essentially I have to do with like 4 or 5 sessions. And 4 or 5 sessions or 4 or 5 hours of talking is actually nothing, almost nothing. If that can help you, that means psychotherapy is actually powerful.
You're saying four or
Yeah,
five
I know.
sessions.
Just
For me, it seems
regular.
like 4 years.
Still, I feel like if I had a therapist, it is good to have a therapist if you can afford one on a regular basis. And we feel like we wait for a mental health issue to crop up to go to therapy.
Right.
Generally it's like, oh, it's nothing. We just brush it off as a bad mood or a bad day. But if it keeps happening, the sooner you go to a talk therapist, the sooner you will break your old pattern, which is not serving you, and move forward. Like, the only restriction is the time you can give, the money you have, and your patience. So initially accepting, then trying to do what they are telling you to do. Those are the two things which one might struggle with.
In my last episode, we did talk about like having universal therapy because
Hmm.
everybody need a therapist. And here again, like the
True.
stigma is something which one should not worry about because most of us have some traumas. So we kind of
Right.
need to understand how to deal with them and basically understand ourselves.
After I went through therapy and all, I got the courage to tell my parents of a lot of problems that I was facing. But then again, their reaction was, why did you have to go to a therapist? You could have spoken to us. So yeah, those kind of things will keep happening because each generation has their own set of beliefs. And you may not be able to convince anyone and everyone, but you should be able to convince yourself that you need therapy. And when you take it, you will see the difference. Try and be open about talking about it later. People will understand eventually. So
Right.
yeah.
You'll find at least some people around you who will understand. It happened with me also. Once I started therapy, I could then talk to other people also about what I'm going through. Otherwise, it was just all locked up inside. I
Lot,
couldn't talk about it with anyone.
you can't even find the words to talk about it,
Right.
and
Yes, you don't even have
the
the.
strength to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I will just start crying, and the person who asked me will have no idea how to deal with the situation. So it becomes awkward, and then there is never any conversation, at least with that person around it. So yeah, I mean, it'll at least give you that much strength that you can talk to the people who are close to you about it, about the problem, and then onward, things will improve.
So I think you've done a bit of research on these different kinds of therapies, which are like not the conventional forms of therapy. So would you like
Hmm.
to share something about these different forms of therapy?
I think neuro-linguistic programming is a very relatively new form of therapy. Rather, we shouldn't even call it therapy. That's just uh, a way of programming our mind. So the idea has come from the realization in science that our minds are actually very adaptive. They're very plastic, what we call. So you can train your brain to do almost anything. Of course, there will be constraints. There will be physical constraints, and I think the biggest constraint is of the mindset and of your own beliefs. So it's basically a way to program your mind, to change, to shift your mindsets, to break the beliefs that are stopping you from, doing things that you want to do. NLP also uses tools that are very logical and rational. Like you can make sense of it. It includes things like visualization. You want to do a certain thing, and you will hear like sports people and very established professionals of any kind, especially in the performing arts and sports and such stuff, that they've always imagined themselves to be this winner or doing this activity, and that's always a part of their routine somehow, and
Hmm.
they have reached that goal. So they're technically just training their brain to believe that they can get there. So that is the first step. So believing in yourself is kind of something of an NLP tool in a very crude way to explain. But there are other tools that it has which are very effective. So yes, we do get results much quickly with it. But again, consistency is key.
So there's a WHO mental health guide which is available for free,
Mm.
and it talks about various techniques that you can follow. And the first
Right.
one is grounding, where you just, sit and do nothing. Just
Right.
focus on everything that is happening around you. And then
Mhm.
there are other exercises which focus on, just like you said, first identifying what is happening inside your head and then eventually changing it. So I was just wondering if you talk about these different techniques, like especially grounding, it's kind of so much similar to what meditation does, that you just stay
Yeah.
with yourself, try not to block any thoughts that are coming to you. Do you have any experience with meditation?
I do have experience with meditation, and I'm trying to get more into it. So grounding, what grounding actually is, to in terms of how it is seen in spirituality, let's say, it is essentially putting yourself close to the earth actually. So the word grounding itself means like sitting on grass, sitting under a tree. So grounding means stay in connection with nature somehow. So people say if you don't have access to a park, sit in your balcony, have a few potted plants around you. Anything. It can be anything that has to do with nature directly. If possible, with soil. Gardening with your own hands is another thing that people say helps you connect with nature. And yes, this is a form of meditation. So you can sit in a lawn under a tree and just be present with your thoughts. Or you can just inculcate gardening. Some people inculcate gardening as a habit so much that they forget everything else while they're doing that. So that is also a form of, grounding meditative state. So, I mean, it comes in varieties, but grounding essentially means being absolutely present, which means being right now, what is going on. And it can mean that 10 thoughts, 100 thoughts will cross your mind. But the only aim there is to not control, not control which thought is going, coming. And people tend to believe that, it just means getting rid of all thoughts and being thoughtless. which is something that is
Right.
probably humanly not achievable. That's why people tend to think that, oh, this is not for us. But presence just means being a witness, observing, and not trying to control. Not only do you not try to control which thoughts are coming and going, you also don't judge the thoughts. Oh, this is a bad thought, this is a good thought. Just observe and let them go.
There are also a few types of completely unorthodox or maybe orthodox therapies which many people will be hesitant to try or believe that they work. And
Mm.
hypnosis is one which I've heard of. So can you tell a little bit about how and like what hypnotherapy is like?
Hypnotherapy is probably the one I find most interesting. Once I started doing all these therapies and trying out, it's similar to what is talked about of meditation or of deep sleep, that there is a state of our brains which is feels like sleep, but you're aware of what is going on around you, and it is restorative. And in that phase, if you put a certain belief or a certain programming in your mind, then it sticks better. Consciously, we avoid going into certain areas of our memories or certain areas of our belief system because it has come out of pain. So, painful memories or shameful memories, they have given us enough negative emotion for us to like shun them from our conscious memory. So that is why we are not able to break that pattern because it's so deeply ingrained. I tried hypnotherapy once. You remain aware of your surroundings throughout the session. So it's not like, oh, that person has the control of my brain and he can make me act like a monkey.
So we've been talking about these different kinds of therapy, and we've seen how people are hesitant to start a therapy or go into therapy. And another issue I think is that we don't
Hmm.
know when to actually seek this kind of help.
Right.
What do you think? Is there a way that you can identify that, now I need to seek some mental health support and start some kind of therapy?
It can be very difficult because I think before you end up with a quote unquote debilitating mental issue, there is a long gray area where you could have taken help, but you were just not able to identify. It's not just the taboo or just the, but also that you can't identify, which is really a very valid. From my experience, what I can tell is if a bad mood persists for too long, or if the same kind of things are happening again and again in different scenarios with you, so then that might be one of the very first things that you can catch on. But then again, you will catch on it only if you're observant of yourself. So that is one thing. Sometimes some really brutal friends can make you realize that, every
About
time
to
you're
say
doing
that.
this or every time it's happening. Yeah. And the connection between mind and body becomes so apparent in mental health issues that you actually have physical symptoms. You have symptoms like body ache, which was a big one for me. And I couldn't understand why, because this is a body problem. How can this be related to that? And I didn't even imagine it to be related. I only understood later that it was related, but it can affect you so much that, strangers could look at me and say that you're not okay. And that was kind of the final straw when kind of an acquaintance, but she later became a friend. I used to live in the hostel and we met at the water cooler and she said, "Hey, what's happening with you? You don't look okay." And I just started crying because like you're just at the verge of breaking point. Observing yourself is one thing that we used to do before. We didn't have smartphones in our hands. I remember my dad used to tell me when I was a kid that every night you should sleep after writing down or thinking about what all happened today and what all I felt about those things. And if you think that you've done something wrong or spoken rudely to someone, and then you should just be like, okay, next time I'll do better. That is also a form of, say, CBT. And so things like meditation or writing a journal, writing a diary helps because then you can see your patterns in like black and white, right? So that might trigger a warning in your head, like, okay, maybe something is going wrong. And of course, I mean, people around you play a huge, huge role. your support system.
How we were saying how expensive therapy is, are there
Mhm.
any options available for students or other people who cannot afford therapy?
In Delhi, I know of this NGO called Sanjeevani, which is entirely based on mental health and suicide prevention and all of that. And they do have psychologists on board and they do take free sessions. But the only thing there is, because it is free and there are more people than not who cannot afford therapy, there is always a huge line. So you might have to wait, you might have to follow up with them more frequently. Or if you, like, say you miss a session, you might get another session in a very long time. And like to stay with the commitment for that period that yes, I will go to therapy becomes a challenge. But at least there are sources available where you can start. You don't have to think like there are absolutely no options if you don't have the money. And I feel during COVID times and all, more and more such things have come up. There is something called Rocket Health, Amaha Health. These are all online app-based sessions. So there are psychologists on the other end who are employed by that organization. And you can have a one-on-one, and they are not as expensive as, let's say, an established, long-standing psychologist. I have seen sessions as cheap as 500 rupees for an hour, which is quite cheap. At least one session where something you can understand.
Thank you, Nishtha. It was wonderful.
Thank you for
It was wonderful to talk to you. And I had heard some of these different names of therapies, CBT, NLP, hypnotherapy. But I mean, I got to know a bit more about these. And you're hearing from people who have taken and tried something, then it makes it relatable and if it lowers down your hesitancy to try that out, because it's a little believable that you can kind of believe, okay, people have done that and it might work for me as well. So thank you so much for telling us and sharing your own experiences.
thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope this helps more people.